Okay. This is a video on sharpening hook knives that have the bevel on the outside. You can see that this one has no rails on the inside, and instead it has a bevel on the outside, so that's where you sharpen it. Again, I'm going to show you using my sandpaper method, but all of the basics are the same in that it's important to stick with your lowest grit, no matter what you're using, until you're certain that the edge geometry is completely correct. And only then go up to the higher grits. So, again, I wrap my sandpaper around the block. I'm going to be using the narrow side, and what I'm paying attention to is this connection of there's a spot, obviously because the hook knife is curved. Oh, there's only one spot in the middle and it lifts off on either side, but there's a spot right in the middle, and I want to make sure that that spot is, as it travels from one end of the blade to the next, is flush on the sandpaper. So that translates to there should always be there should always be one spot that's at the lowest point that is completely flush with the sandpaper. If you can see a gap of space between the edge of the blade and the sandpaper at that lowest spot, it means you aren't rocked forward enough on the bevel. Now, there's always the risk that you'll rock too far forward on the bevel, so you want to be as far, a lot of times these bevels have a slight curve to them, so it's not like a flat bevel that you can feel on it. So what you want to do is you want to essentially rock back until you see that little gap of light, and then rock forward just slightly, and then you'll feel the angle that you should be at. Now, starting at this end and rotating to the tip, I'm going to go down the sandpaper, watching that spot at the lowest point the entire time, and making sure that it is flush with the sandpaper, like that. Now, especially on hook knives that have even more of a curve at the tip, this can be really tricky because you're doing this awkward thing with your wrist. So instead, what I found useful is once I have a sense of it, I'm moving both the block and the knife. The knife actually less so than the block because of how it works. It's easier to do this with your hand than it is to do anything weird with your hand here. So I'm pulling down and rotating up like this. And once you kind of get that locked in, the nice thing is you can actually see it. You can see the connection right here. It's right in front of your eyes, and you can tell if it's truly flush or not. Again, pay attention, make sure that you're getting the very tip as well, because you do a lot of work with from the front half of the blade, from here to the tip. So you got to make sure that that tip is nice and sharp. And while it won't create much of a wire edge because you're going towards the edge, so it just won't create as strong of a wire edge, what you're feeling for is the creation of a wire edge on this inside edge, which you feel for by just running your finger perpendicularly across the blade, right? So this way, essentially. And you want to stick with that lowest grit until you feel a nice wire edge along the entire blade. And then once you feel that, there we go, nice strong wire edge, then you start walking your way up through the grits. Do not start walking your way up through the grits until you feel that wire edge along the entire edge. But then once you start walking your way up through the grits, again, make sure your form is good, make sure you're actually right on that edge and no more. You don't want to be rocked off of it, and you don't want to be rolled onto it. You want to be right on the spot. And the nice thing about doing it this way is that the whole thing is just 4 inches in front of my eyeballs, so I can really see if I'm getting it right or not. If you do this with the block held on the table, you can't really see what you're doing as well. And so I would highly recommend trying to sharpen your hook knife in hand like this and just concentrate on that connection between the blade and the sharpening medium, in this case the sandpaper. Again, you can see the sandpaper is not totally flush to the block. I'm not a big believer in using sticky back sandpaper or spray adhesive to hold sandpaper down or anything like that. I find it does not materially affect my ability to get a nice sharp edge. So once you've done a dozen or so strokes with that, you walk your way up through the grits. Everything I said earlier about needing to be careful as you go up through the grits because you stop being able to feel when you're off of the spot you should be is true. When you're using the low grits and you accidentally change your angle slightly, you'll feel it because that coarse low grit is now going to be dragging some grooves through some fresh metal and it'll feel bumpy. As you get up through the higher grits, you need to make sure your form is really nice and clean because you aren't going to get that same tactile feedback because it's just not. I'm just going to wipe down the blade. There's so much dust on the blade that I actually can't tell if I'm seeing it truly or not. There we go. Oh yeah, very good. As you get up through the finer grits, you're not going to get that same feedback if your form is sloppy. So you got to watch it with your eyes to make sure your form is nice and clean. Here I am at 3000. This is going to be my last grit. And then you do need a dowel for this this type of hook knife, even though you do all the sharpening on the outside, because you're going to wrap sandpaper around the dowel. Always put a sheath on your knife, even if you're putting it down for just a second. So you're going to wrap the sandpaper around the dowel, and then you're going to use this to remove the wire edge. It should be fairly, the wire edge should be less at this point than it was when you initially created it. And what you're looking for is for it to be totally flat on that blade. You do not want it to be rolled onto the edge at all. You want it to be completely flat. And it's the same sort of gentle push-twist motion that you would use to sharpen an inner bevel rail system hook knife. And all you're doing is you're doing just a couple strokes, and you'll feel it when that burr is gone. Yeah, burr is gone now. You can feel it both with your finger like that, but you can also feel it when you're making this push and twist motion. You'll feel it, and then you'll feel it when it's gone. So, again, always wash your hands when you're done sharpening your knives, and that is how to sharpen an outside bevel hook knife. I will do stropping of hook knives and sloyd knives in a different video.